Today, we're diving into what is arguably the single largest and most decisive battle ever fought on English soil, the Battle of Marston Moor. So picture this. It's July 2nd, 1644. The sun is setting, and two massive armies are staring each other down across a wide-open moor right outside the city of York. This isn't just some small skirmish. Over the next couple of hours, the entire direction of the English Civil War is about to get turned on its head. And the scale of this, it's just staggering. We're talking about a combined total of around 46,000 soldiers. You've got about 18,000 royalists, loyal to King Charles I on one side, and facing them, a combined army of about 28,000 parliamentarians and their Scottish allies. Nothing on this scale had ever been seen in England before. Now, you might think a battle this huge was for control of the whole country, right? But no, Marston Moor was really fought over the fate of just one city, York. So how did this one brutal fight end up not just destroying a royalist army, but creating a military legend and deciding who controlled the entire north of England? Well, to really get the battle, you first have to understand the absolutely brutal siege that came right before it. York was the royalist capital in the north, and for weeks it had been totally surrounded, constantly bombarded, and basically starved out by those allied armies. Life, both inside and outside the city walls, was a special kind of hell. This quote from someone living in the city at the time just paints such a grim picture of the desperation. They wrote about pure starvation and constant fear, saying things like, "The sound of their great guns was so dreadful that the very air seemed to shake. It was a misery to go abroad." The city was literally on the verge of collapse. And for the soldiers on the outside laying the siege, it wasn't much better. This quote comes from a parliamentarian soldier who talked about the back-breaking work of digging trenches under constant fire. It was just this grueling war of attrition, filled with disease, exhaustion, and the constant threat of getting hit by a cannonball. So this whole stalemate gets blown wide open when the king's nephew, the famous and pretty feared Prince Rupert, shows up with a relief army. He brilliantly outmaneuvers the allies, lifts the siege, and then, and this is key, he decides to chase down the retreating enemy to force one big, decisive battle on the moor. So let's take a look at the armies about to smash into each other. All right, so the Allies, led by a seasoned Scottish general, the Earl of Leven, they've got the numbers on their side, for sure. But the Royalists, under the super aggressive Prince Rupert, had some of the best cavalry in the entire country. And you're going to want to keep your eye on a couple of key guys here. Oliver Cromwell on the parliamentarian side, and Lord Goring for the Royalists. What they do is going to be absolutely pivotal. Now, to really get what's about to happen, you need to understand how these armies fought. The infantry, they were a tag team of two types of soldiers, musketeers and pikemen. The muskets, obviously, they brought the firepower, but they were incredibly slow to reload. And during that reload time, they were sitting ducks. So they relied on the pikemen with their massive 16-foot spears to create this bristling wall of steel that could stop a cavalry charge dead in its tracks. It was a deadly but totally necessary partnership. So as evening starts to set in, the Royalists are pretty much convinced that, hey, there's no way there's going to be a battle tonight. They figured they'd fight in the morning. But then, around 7 p.m., just as a big thunderstorm starts to roll in, the parliamentarians launch a sudden all-out attack. One soldier would later write it was the most cruel fight that ever I saw. And the battle just swung violently back and forth. At first, it looked like a total disaster for the parliamentarians. Lord Goring's cavalry just shattered their right flank, and their infantry in the middle started to completely break and run for their lives. The battle was almost lost for them. But on the other side of the field, something absolutely incredible happened. Oliver Cromwell's cavalry didn't just hold their ground, they completely routed Prince Rupert's own elite horsemen. And then, and this is the genius part, he showed this unbelievable discipline. He got his men back together, regrouped, and then just slammed them into the back of the Royalist infantry who were still busy fighting and thought they were winning. That was the turning point. Just to give you a sense of the absolute chaos, the poet Payne Fisher, who was actually fighting on the Royalist side that day, he described this sheer panic as the Allied center just collapsed. He compared the Scottish troops who were running away to a scattered swarm of fleeing bees. What a vivid image of an army just completely falling apart. And this right here is the moment that a legend was born. Before Marston Moor, Oliver Cromwell was a solid commander, sure, but not famous. After this battle, he was seen as nothing short of a military genius. He was the man whose Ironside cavalry proved to be the most disciplined and lethal fighting force of the entire war. That very same poet, Payne Fisher, gave us this absolutely unforgettable description of Cromwell on the battlefield. It just captures this almost mythical, terrifying aura he had. A guy who looked like he embodied the storm of war itself. This wasn't just a general, this was a force of nature. In just 2 hours, it was all over. And for the Royalists, this wasn't just a defeat, it was an absolute catastrophe. The aftermath was immediate, it was brutal, and it completely redrew the map of the war in the north. The numbers alone tell a story of sheer annihilation. The Royalists lost around 4,000 men killed on the field, with another 1,500 captured. The Allies, even after their lines almost broke, lost only about 300 men. The main Royalist army in the north was effectively erased in a single evening. So the consequences were just enormous. York, the city this was all fought over, surrendered just 2 weeks later. The king lost his grip on the north for good, Prince Rupert's reputation as being invincible was shattered, while Oliver Cromwell's was forged in steel. This one battle really did shift the entire balance of power in the war. This quote from a defeated royalist soldier just captures the finality of it all. As he's marching away from the city after it surrendered, he looks back at the smoking ruins. For him and for the entire royalist cause in the north, it was really and truly the end. But the story doesn't actually end on the battlefield. The fight over the memory of Marston Moor, how it would be remembered, that started almost right away. And as is so often the case, the winner gets to write that first draft of history. Let's go back to our poet, Payne Fisher, because his personal journey is pretty fascinating. So he fought for the king at Marston Moor and was actually captured. A few years go by and he pops back up as a celebrated poet, but for Oliver Cromwell and the new government. His own story kind of mirrors the massive political shift happening in the country itself. And this is just a perfect example of how the sausage of history gets made. Fisher literally rewrote his own poem about the battle. His first draft is basically this sad elegy for the royalist cause, but the version that gets published later, it's a total celebration of Parliament's victory. The praise shifts from the brave defenders of York to the unstoppable force of Oliver Cromwell. He didn't just change a few words, he completely flipped the entire meaning of the event to get in good with his new patrons. Which really leaves us with this final thought. Marston Moor was a massive, pivotal military event, no doubt. But the story of Payne Fisher reminds us that the battle for the narrative, for the story we tell ourselves, is just as important. It forces us to ask a really critical question. When history is written by the winners, how can we ever be sure we're getting the whole story?